Welcome everyone, my name is Frank Castillo and our session today is entitled, It's All About Trust. Glad you could be with us. It's been a tremendous night tonight, or I should say last night in the low country. We had so much rain that came down, so glad we have some power today to be able to broadcast our session. We'll mostly focus on client relationships from a public accounting perspective. We'll talk about value-added services. We'll also talk about some unique situations like client transition. So lots to cover over the next hour. So glad again that you're with us. Learning objectives, we'll recall the perception clients have of practitioners and ways we can enhance those perceptions. We'll also identify various value-added services which strengthen the bond of trust with clients. And lastly, we'll recall tips that CPAs can use to facilitate client transitions and also obtain referrals from clients. So again, much to cover and no time like the present to jump right in. So let's first talk about a client's view. And this isn't necessarily to say this is exactly what a client's view would be. I think there are some universal things that we can all agree on that a client sees as a CPA. We're obviously ethical, we're detailed and organized, we're risk averse, and smart. But what is the perception that we're giving off when we're talking with clients, when they're approaching us with various problems or situations that we need to resolve? And what is their perception? Because the biggest one that I have on the slide here is, do they just always see us as busy and expensive? I have on there as well. And this, one thing that we always have to be mindful of is who we are as individuals, but what is the perception that we're giving to clients and vendors and just the community at large as it relates to our work and our approach to not only working with clients, but we'll talk about referrals in just a bit. Because if clients just see us all the time as busy, and again, I remember one conversation, or actually a meeting that we had many years ago in the first public accounting firm I was at, and we had a whole discussion about perception. And the one walkaway that I always remember is when a client calls you on the phone, which maybe not what happens much anymore, but let's just say they call you on the phone and they ask you, well, hey, how you doing? And if you're just like, oh, I'm just busy all the time, that immediately just puts a barrier up between you and your client as to what you're capable of doing for work. They put on their heels with the comment like that. And I remember that the comment from the speaker that day was that when they ask you that question, you can be honest and say, yeah, I'm busy, but I'm always ready to talk to you, and busy, but I'm happy to chat and happy to, always ready for new business. So, something a little bit more positive that has to be natural, obviously, but not to say you should be lying. If you're busy, you are busy, but you don't, impressions matter. And we don't want to give an impression where we always feel like we're just wore out, because if we do, that really impacts our ability to connect with our clients. So what are some of the ways that we want to be viewed? I don't think that there's anything on this list that, or on the slide, that necessarily we wouldn't agree to collectively. Obviously, we still have ethical, we're detailed and organized, we're risk averse, but we want to be known for being communicators and being collaborators. We are fortune tellers. I think part of our, when we look at, we'll talk about cash management type services in just a bit, but the ability to help clients, this goes to risk averse. The ability to measure risk in the foreseeable future, that fortune teller role is pretty important. For accountants who can help them, clients, anticipate any sort of landmines that might be on the horizon is a tremendous value-added type service that you can provide. Simply not, as I always say, I'm not necessarily, clients will hire me because I'm helping them to create their history, not necessarily just report on it. I'm helping them to make decisions for the future as much as I am recording what already took place. And if you can adopt that approach, I think you'll find that it's far more successful in terms of billing, in terms of the happiness and the connection that you have with your clients. We have niche experts as well, and this is probably an area that will continue to expand over the years to come. I think we find a trend in our profession where being a generalist has its advantages, but niche work, when it comes to working remotely, has a bit more attraction to it. And I think a general practitioner will always do well geographically, and we'll get into geography in just a minute and how important that is for future generations of CPAs coming through a firm. Because if you're located in Dallas, Texas, or if you're located in Denver, Colorado, or small town Iowa, or somewhere where knowing your clients intimately because of proximity is a tremendous advantage versus a firm or a company that's working remotely. But that's not always going to be the case. You may have a particular niche industry, a client would, and that client would then want to seek out those experts in those niches. And if it's not available locally, then it may be available remotely. And that's just an option that didn't really exist 5 and 10 years ago that we find now. So we need to, as CPAs, identify what our strength is. Are we a niche type practice that can attract clients from all across the country, which involves a completely different skill set and tech stack and all of that, as opposed to a geographically based type of practice, which I would almost argue is less technology driven from that standpoint. And you really would want to rely more on interpersonal relationships, direct connection in meetings, and almost take a little bit of an old-fashioned approach. And not to slant, you'll notice that I'll always take a little bit of a hit against technology because I don't think it serves us well all the time, 100% of the time. And I think in those relationships where we have close, intimate relationships with clients locally, and they're good paying clients and it's interesting work, when we start making technology demands on them to use portals and do all of these other things, that doesn't really differentiate us from a niche type practice that may come in remotely doing that sort of work. It's, they're paying for that connection. So I don't think we can lose sight of that. And that plays to quarterback, which is probably a term that really captures the spirit of who we are as CPAs. Not a slight against financial advisors or insurance agents or anyone or attorneys, but the CPA, in my opinion, I've always treated it like a personal CFO type of approach, where the client is relying on me for my advice along the way. If there's a major transaction about to take place or a big decision there, they're calling me before the transaction. They're not calling me afterwards. And it's my ability to sort of muster the troops and involve the attorney or the investment advisor in different roles based on what the needs are. I think that's vitally important. If you can establish that level of relationship with your clients, if that's the nature of your practice, then you'll be wildly successful. And that really is where, it's all of these elements that contribute to that trusted advisor moniker that the AICPA does a good job of, I think, in promoting that we are the trusted advisor. But it's simply not a label that we can purchase, slap on our letterhead, and assume that that's just what happens. We have to earn that. We earn that through deep, meaningful conversations with our clients and the relationships that we foster. And that's not to say that remote work won't have an impact in the future. And we'll get into this in just a bit as far as clients and different ways that they want to interact with us. Some may very well provide, or I should say, prefer a remote situation versus those that want to meet in person. And that's not necessarily age driven, where older people would prefer that. Maybe it could be younger people. We'll find that the way to discover that is to simply ask the question. We'll take a moment now. Well, let's talk about those connections with clients. And I've got the quote from the Beatles, "I will be there." I'm not even going to sing it. Here, there, and everywhere. And the Beatle purists will actually probably note that this is Abbey Road, but the "Here, There, and Everywhere" songs from Revolver. So I want to make sure I don't offend anyone there. Particularly young kids. My daughters are now, my youngest is 17, my oldest is 22, and there's sort of a Beatles resurgence going on. So hopefully this appeals to a lot of different demographics. But anyways,